Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in Chinon and we're looking at the Manoir de la Bellonnière 2020 Les Battereaux Chinon. The Moreau family have been farming vines in Cravant-Les-Côteaux for 3 generations. Their story begins with Yves Moreau, who set up his polyculture estate in 1976 with just a handful of vines. Yves was later joined by his nephew Patrice in 1982, and then they expanded the domaine by another 10 hectares of vineyards in 1992. Since 2008, Patrice's son Alexandre has joined the estate, and this marked an important shift in the domaine's history. And since Alexandre has joined the estate, they have begun producing and bottling their own wine rather than simply selling all of their grapes to other vignerons. They're farming around 27 hectares of vines, predominantly Cabernet Franc with a little bit of Chinon as well. And their vineyards have always been farmed without any chemical treatments, and as of 2022, they've begun the process towards organic certification. Today's wine is one of 2 cuvées parcellaires that the family makes from Cabernet Franc, and the lieu-dit is Les Battereaux, which is in Cravant-Les-Côteaux. And this lieu-dit also has some of the family's oldest vines that were planted in 1929. Now, it's been some time since I featured a wine from Cravant-Les-Côteaux, and more specifically the alluvial terrace in Cravant-Les-Côteaux, so I will take a moment to highlight some of the key features that define this particular part of the commune. First and foremost, Cravant-Les-Côteaux is the largest commune of production in the Chinon appellation, representing approximately 50% of the Chinon appellation's production. And much of the reason for this is this large alluvial terrace that dominates the commune. So just east of the Chinon village itself, the alluvial terrace stretches across 3 communes on the north side or the right bank of the Vienne River: Chinon, Cravant-Les-Côteaux, and Pont-Zoul. And the alluvial terrace stretches about 9 kilometers from west to east, and 2/3 of this alluvial terrace is located in Cravant-Les-Côteaux. The vineyard area here starts just at the banks, like right at the banks of the Vienne River, and it stretches about 1.5 to 1.75 kilometers inland to the north towards the côte or the slopes. Because of our proximity to the Vienne River, in addition to all the different tributaries and streams that we find weaving their way across this alluvial terrace, the vineyards here will actually have good access to water. And this is one of the contributing factors that contributes to the slightly higher yields that we find from the vineyards that are on the alluvial terrace. Now, the alluvial terrace is for the most part pretty flat at a lower elevation of around 30 to 38 meters above sea level. And this flat topography means that these vineyards are a little bit easier to work, and that the vineyard work doesn't necessarily have to be all done by hand, which is often the case on the slopes. And so for the vignerons that choose to mechanize their vineyards or a portion of their vineyard work, this will lower their cost of production. And in terms of the flat topography here as well, another interesting point to note is that the flat topography means that these vineyards will enjoy uninterrupted sunshine during the day, and this is of course very good for ripening. Now, in terms of soils across this part of the commune, we often generalize these alluvial soils as being the sandy, gravelly soils of Chinon, and that is a gross simplification, of course, and it's a lot more complicated than that. And so much so, in fact, that the Chinon appellation has actually defined 3 distinct groups of these alluvial soils on the terrace. So we have the recent alluvial soils that are at the lowest lying elevations of the terrace, and then we have a mix of recent and ancient alluvial soils that are at a slightly higher elevation. And then on the middle and upper terraces, we will find ancient alluvium. Now, I recognize that this is a very granular level of detail for most people, but there are some generalizations that we can make about these alluvial soils of the alluvial terrace. So first and foremost, the topsoil that dominates here is either sand or silty sand in texture. And there are a few pockets here of topsoil that have a little bit more clay as well, but for the most part, we're dealing with either a sandy or a silty sandy topsoil. The topsoils as well are quite deep, and they sit atop the lower Turonian tuffo chalk bedrock. The stoniness of the topsoils varies widely across the alluvial terrace. In some instances, we have 0 to 5% stones, so almost no stones. The vineyards almost look more like a beach than they do a vineyard. And then in some instances, we have very gravelly soils where we have 75 to 100% stones or gravels. In terms of the subsoil, this is what we find at depths of around 70 to 120 centimeters. This will vary quite a bit from parcel to parcel, but there's generally two kinds of subsoils. We'll either have sandy or clay sandy subsoils, or we'll find more gravelly subsoils. Now, in terms of the wines from this particular part of the Chinon appellation and of Cravant-Les-Côteaux, because of these lighter soils, as well as the access to water, which can contribute to slightly higher yields, generally speaking, the fruit from these vineyards is best suited to producing wines that are lighter, softer, less structured, more early drinking styles of Cabernet Franc. But of course, as always, there's exceptions to the rule. Looking a little bit closer at the lieu-dit for today's wine, Les Battereaux is quite a large lieu-dit. It's about 67 hectares in size, and there's about a dozen vignerons that have parcels here. And the lieu-dit is located in the eastern part of the Cravant-Les-Côteaux commune, and we're set back a bit from the Vienne River. We're about 1 kilometer north of the Vienne River, and the northern edge of this lieu-dit is bordered by a canal, and then there's a tree line here, and this actually delineates the northern border of the alluvial terrace with the slopes starting just above. Now, the Moreau family has about 3.5 hectares of vineyards here, parcels of vines, I should say, in this particular lieu-dit. And Alexandre will do a selection for this cuvée coming from about 3 of those 3.5 hectares. In terms of soils, obviously this is a very large lieu-dit, so the soils will vary quite a bit across this large area. And in the Moreau family's parcels, they actually have a little bit more clay and silt in the topsoil. The topsoil is also moderately stony, about 45 to 50% stones as well. The topsoil is relatively shallow too, which is kind of interesting, about 60 centimeters of topsoil. And then the subsoil here is gravel, so a lot more of those gravelly subsoils as well. The vines range in age from around 50 to 90, over 90 years of age, which is amazing. And the combination of these older vines coupled with the unique characteristics of these soils, these parcels that the family has actually tend to naturally yield a little bit lower, around 30 hectoliters per hectare, which is a little bit lower than what we would typically see coming from the alluvial terrace here in Cravant-Les-Côteaux. Now, from a winemaking perspective, all the fruit for this wine is hand harvested, hand sorted, and it is destemmed. And the fermentation is whole berry with indigenous yeast in unlined or untreated concrete tanks. Alex, actually, I should say, really strives to keep his fermentation temperature below 26 degrees Celsius. In terms of maceration, his approach is very gentle here, and he'll ensure that he fills the tank right to the top. And this actually means that 100% of the juice is in contact with the berries. And this means that the cap won't dry out. This eliminates the need for pumping over as well. So it's maceration through infusion, so very gently. The total time on skins is about 12 days. And then after the devatting, he will then reassemble the pressed juice or the pressed wine as well as the free run wine. And then the wine will age in concrete tank again for around 1 year before it is then bottled. So let's see what this wine is giving us today. So the nose has a really nice lift and brightness as well. And the fruits lean in that sweet, tart kind of spectrum with a little bit of a savory kind of flicker there as well. So I'm getting a little bit of raspberry here. There's a bit of cranberry. There's a bit of red currant as well. And I love how the herbal undertones are coming through in this wine. It does lean a little bit more on the savory side, and I have no problem with that whatsoever because I love that when my Chinons have that little bit of a savory, earthy edge. And this is very classic in terms of the pyrazine profile. I'm getting some thyme, some other sturdy herbs like rosemary. There's a bit of a spruce tips thing going on, so there's an evergreen thing happening too. And there's also a touch of spiciness on the nose, like a pepperiness to the nose as well. But in general, the nose is clean, it's bright, it's lifted, it's really inviting. On the palate, those same sweet tart fruits come through as they did on the nose. And it's got this wonderful kind of tart edge to the palate as well. It's like that red currant and cranberry kind of come in at the end, which is really lovely. The spiciness is also quite pronounced on the palate. I'm getting a bit of mix of black as well as some green peppercorn here as well. Those herbal undertones come through really nicely. There's even a little bit of a floral element to the palate as well. The acidity of this wine is like delicious. It's bright, it's crunchy, it's almost brisk in a way. There's this like almost like a cool freshness to the acidity, which is really lovely. The tannins are interesting. The tannins are firm. They do have a very finely woven texture, a gorgeous velvety, crushed velvet kind of finish to them. They finish a little bit on the chalky side, but there is a certain firmness to the tannins, which gives this wine a little bit more structure, but at the same time, they're very approachable. So they're by no means harsh in any way. They're really lovely, the tannins. Yeah. So in terms of the profile of this wine, it's medium bodied. There's a really nice supple texture in the mouth. There's a certain focus as well. I think that acidity is providing a nice backbone, a nice sense of focus and direction for the wine. And it does have some concentration here as well. So, this is a wine that, as much as, it's coming from this area of the appellation where we typically find more easy drinking early styles of Chinon, this is a wine you could definitely hold for, the medium term for sure. And I think it's definitely going to improve with a little bit of time in the bottle as well. In general, there is a serious edge to it, but there's also the ease of the wine as well, which I really love. And the French have this wonderful word, digeste, that they use sometimes to describe wines. And it's a bit of a difficult one to translate into English, but it means that they have, they're digestible. They have this quality to them that really just makes you want to kind of dive back in and have another glass and have another sip. This is a wonderful introduction to Manoir de la Bellonnière, and this is now my second opportunity tasting this wine. I was introduced to the domaine by the fine folks at Vigny Be Good at the La Levée fair that was a few weeks ago, and I tasted the whole range from the estate, and this was actually the wine that really spoke to me, and there was something about it that I found really quite compelling, and it's a thrill now to be able to retaste this again and tell the story of the family. And it's always cool to have an opportunity to introduce a new domain to people that they may not otherwise know. I talk a lot about some of these very established estates in Chinon, and so it's nice to introduce people to a newcomer to the landscape. And I'm going to be following this domain really closely as the years and decades progress, and I look forward to visiting Alexandre and his family in hopefully sooner rather than later. And I know that the distribution of this wine may be a little bit on the limited side, but do keep this one on your radar, because I think the estate is going in a really beautiful direction, and I'm very excited for what is to come from Manoir de la Bellonnière. And if you've had these wines before, do let me know what you thought of them in the comments below. Or if you have another favorite wine from Chinon or from Cravant-Les-Côteaux specifically, and the alluvial soils in Cravant-Les-Côteaux, let me know what that wine is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.